Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes and Hi, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing chapter 91. The house's balcony was on the third floor and looked over wealth-filled houses that, in the daytime, were resplendent with their vibrant colors set among large yards. In the darkness, with only essence-powered lights among the streets or lamp in the windows, he only saw spots of colors, and they looked dull. He picked this balcony for his entry because it meant an inexperienced rogue wouldn't have to worry about hanging on as they unlocked the door. The house had many windows the more experienced one could use. He took picks out of his bracers and set about unlocking it. It felt strange to break into a house with no plan of taking anything, especially a noble's house, but this was about evaluating Emilia's house and its suitability as a training place for mega rogues. It also meant he needed to work with what those rogues would have. I don't need the also. It meant he needed to work with what those rogues would have. When was the last time he'd broken into a house using lockpicks? The lock yielded to him quickly, and he cracked the door open. Someone snored. This was the house regent's room. The man had been informed that Amelia had volunteered her house, but he had been adamant that he would give anyone caught breaking in a solid beating. He smiled as he located the wicker cane by the bed within the man's reach. Rogues who'd found Stowe's silent shoe would have an easier time moving through this room. He didn't need them. He didn't even need to use essence to move unheard. He reached the door and it was locked. He smirked at the sleeping man, like that made things any more difficult. The smile faded as he reconsidered. This wasn't a problem for him, but an Omega? He nodded in appreciating the complication the regent had added. This would force the rogue to evaluate if the loot was worth the danger. They wouldn't know about the lack of real consequence being caught the first time they came through. Tibs silently unlocked the door and carefully cracked it open. He smiled at the lack of squeaking. Nobles' houses were good for that. Hinges were well oiled. He used his body to block the light in case the regent was sensitive to it. Even without essence, some people work at the slightest beam of light. A woman walked by the door without noticing it wasn't fully closed. She wore the light clothing of a servant, but it was woven through with essence Tibs couldn't identify, most likely metal. Amelia wasn't a fool. She had guards inside her house. They too were in on the help she was providing, but only Amelia would know when a rogue would break in. She thought it was a way to keep her guards on their toes, as well as helping Tibs' rogue. There was one reason she'd agreed. The other, she said giddily, was that it sounded fun. Tibs stopped sensing, reminding himself that was something the others didn't have. Tibs stopped sensing, reminding himself that was something the others didn't have. Chroma here, as the guard posing as a servant reached the stairs and continued down them. Tibs exited the room and closed the door, pausing at the click of the latch and listening for motion inside the room. Then he moved towards the stair. The challenge with this entry point was that his target was one floor below, and the only way there inside the house was the stairwell the guard had taken. Once the guard reached the landing, she would turn and make her way back up. There was a door on each side of the hall before reaching it, so a rogue planning on using either would have to be quick to make it in and hope they didn't wake the person inside. The room on the left was Amelia's. The one on the right was Andia's. The arrangement confused Tibs. Watching them during his meeting to negotiate the use of Amelia's house, he thought they were special to one another, like Jacqueline and Fosef were. But then, by the separate sleeping rooms, it didn't fly. He also didn't use either room. He leaped from one way Okay, yeah, this. Why did I keep this? He scurried up the wall till he was in the corner by the stairs and held himself there using only strength. Wanted a sense of how observant the guard was. It was getting easier to hold himself without using earth to increase his strength. His ice sword might weigh nothing, but slashing, parrying, and blocking was a strain, and as a consequence, he was getting stronger. The guard came back, and Tibs fought the urge to switch to darkness to ensure he wouldn't be seen in the shadow. Few runners had darkness as their element, and an Omega wouldn't even have the option of anyone. The guard walked under him without glancing up. When she reached the regent's door, it dropped silently and was moving down the stairs, avoiding the fourth one, which he noticed creaked when Amelia gave him a tour of the house. Conversation stopped him at the landing, and he fought against sensing who was there and if the guard was on her way back. Laughter in the next floor he started for. A glance around the turn on the stairs didn't show him anyone, so he eased himself down those steps until he saw them, a man and a woman. Their back to him halfway down the hall. He was rotund, she was muscular. Just couldn't make out what they said. He listened for the guards, who had to be on their way back now, but didn't hear her. She was light on her feet, so he might not hear her in time. The two weren't moving. There was a door on the left, but it might be locked. Of course, the only thing standing here would get him was Scott. Was Scott. He chose the picks as he'd use once he saw the lock. This, having to work with the real chance of being detected, would cause many rogues to be caught. Indecision could be more dangerous than action. It'd also lose time having to figure out which pick the lock needed. Tibs had the right one and was inside. It was a servant's room and was silent. Maybe it was the room of the one of maybe it was the room of one of the two in one of the two in the hall used, which meant one or both of them might come in. A visual check of the room told them the best place to hide was under the bed, as if that wouldn't be the first place the occupant checked on entering. He heard the guard speak from the bottom of the stairs and replied in a jovial tone. A moment later, that fourth step creaked, and Tibs cracked the door open. The man patted the woman on the shoulder and entered the room to his right. She headed toward this room. Tibs cursed him, and he gently closed the door. Is this her room? He'd been certain she was a guard, too. Did Amelia treat her guards so well? Did Amelia treat her guards roll well enough to let them have individual rooms instead of a common one? He stepped away, listening, ready to jump under the bed. When the door didn't open, he cursed himself for not relocking it. When he thought she would reach it, he returned to it and listened. Not hearing anything, he cracked it open in time to see her head vanish down the stairs. He hurried to the door to the left at the end of the corridor. His turn. This lock was better and required a delicate touch. This would be where most would get caught, as they would have little time to open it. Once she reached the bottom of the stairs, she would turn, and the lock clicked as her brown hair came into view. I don't need to say that. The lock clicked as her brown hair came into view. He was inside, the door closed and relocked. His exit would be through the window. He listened to the silence, resisting the urge to use his element to help him. This was Amelia's office, a servant's room she had converted. The desk was in the corner, so she could see the door. Tibs hadn't liked having his back to it all the talk. In front of the desk would be two chairs for those speaking with her. To the left were two more chairs, more comfortable, with a table between them for those she was more comfortable. Two more at ease. Negotiating with. What he was after would be on the desk. That was one thing they'd argued over. Tibbs had wanted it in a safe as added training, but Amelia wouldn't allow the use of that and didn't see a point in adding one just for training. So the carving called the tree was on the desk, just asking to be taken, yelling that it was a trap. Wasn't sure if this would be the clue that tipped off the rogue. Something was wrong with this setup. With the setup. His plan to have the rogue who wanted to train come here of their own volition. Baron would hint he had a buyer willing to pay good coin for the carving, so he would reward any who brought it to him handsomely. Everyone knew Tibbs disliked Everyone knew of Tibbs's dislike for nobles, so they wouldn't question the offer from someone known to be his friend. The merchant would also hint to others that expressed interest in making the coins, so the rogue would have to worry. Rushed work led to mistake. Under the conditions he had engineered with Amelia, those mistakes would lead to learning. The setup would only work the first time with each rogue, but he thought it was enough so they would take any subsequent run through the house seriously. He moved cautiously, not relying on his memory of the layout, but testing with a foot that the path was cleared, and stepped around any moved obstacle. He reached the desk and clunked a copper coin on it before sitting on a chair facing it. The lamp lit, showing Amelia touching the wick with a fine stone. I saw the door open, she stated, which is why I said that wouldn't count. If a rogue chooses when you're working here to break in, they deserve to be caught. What did you think of my security? Tibbs smiled. They didn't see me. She nodded. Which means I need to have a talk with them. What should I bring up? He didn't like helping the noble, especially not with making their house more secure, but that had been part of the agreement. This first run was both, so Tibbs had a sense of what the rogue would deal with, and so Amelia could ensure no one other than those being trained had a chance of making it to this room. They don't look up, he said reluctantly, telling himself that for all Amelia was a noble, she was the least noblish of them all. Yeah. Of them. I hid in a corner of the wall and ceiling by the stairs, and she walked under me. You also don't pay attention to details. I had the door cracked open, and she missed it. She smiled. The danger of a quiet life. He shrugged. So, any rogue caught is returned with you with nothing more than bruises, and those who manage to take this, she pointed to the carving, and stone with part of the top jutting out randomly in what Tibbs could imagine were branches if he tried hard. Gets told they're good enough to attempt one of the other houses and probably won't be caught. How long until they spread the word this is just a test? I'm hoping to convince them that having others go through this blind is best. Rogues. Yeah, this is not going to work. So, even knowing there are no consequences or reward, some will still want to test themselves against your guards. Watching thoughtfully. We can widen that. No, it's staring her. I told you before, we aren't bringing anyone else into this. I only trust you with this because Mez vouches for you. Even you said most of the other nobles aren't good people. Most, she said. There are some who see our position as an honor, not a privilege to be exploited. No, she nodded. Then I will hope I can earn your trust enough that my word will mean as much as Mizano's. She stood. I shall escort you out. There's no need for you to jump out the window. Tibbs looked around the warehouse. The wall showed no more damage than the last time he'd been here, even if he'd practiced channeling air only a few days ago. It kept the playfulness from getting out of control. He was getting good at that with nearly every element, except fire. He knew he'd have to deal with it at some point, but he was terrified. of how raw everything was when he channeled it. He wished he could rip that element out of him. Okay, that's still stranger than when you channel corruption, Mez said. What? Tibs asked, turning his attention to his friend. He wished Mez would stop lying to himself about the price he was paying for what he was after. He thought about telling him, but he had enough control over the element not to blurt it out. The way your house glow, but don't produce light, Trina answered. Considering you're channeling a light, you have to admit that's odd. The essence, he corrected. That was one thing about channeling that essence. He hated when people were imprecise. Trina knew how important it was to use the right words, so it annoyed him even more when she didn't bother. How do you feel? Jekyll asked. Lonely, stressed, wishing I'd let Sebastian destroy all of this. What? He asked his friends. He asked at his friend's troubled expression, then realized what he blurted out. I'm not always wanting that. He said, it has been rough. You didn't say that before. He shrugged. I didn't have a bad day then. And this isn't your burden, so why would I volunteer information that will just make your life more difficult? Because we're your friends, I said. And Tibs was pleased to see the usher wasn't lying. They'd resolved their difficulties, but there were times when he hadn't been sure that meant they were friends again. That is why I won't burden you with this any more than this. That's why I won't burden you with this more than I already have. Wait, what? That's why I won't burden you with this more than I already have. I took on the responsibility of keeping the town safe, not you. That also means keeping all of you safe from everything that comes with having taken on the responsibility. From Dar smile. There is the overabundance of honesty you are in need of controlling, Tibs. How about you control that need to lie instead? Tibs snapped. The cleric stiffened. And what do you mean by that? Tibs stepped to the man, watching the spikes of light trying to escape the darkness engulfing him. He kept the sneer under control, but he didn't understand how the cleric spent so much energy hiding so much. That was a lie. He knew why. Okay. This needs to be adjusted. The twinge of pain told him that was a lie. He knew why. He felt it when he channeled darkness. He just lied to himself. Was that a mark of improvement or a detail of how light worked he hadn't noticed before? What are you hiding from yourself? Tibs asked, and was surprised that Kamdar jerked away, as if Tibs had poked him with fire instead of a question. Was that a reaction to his light? Could he use it to burn away the darkness? Or some honesty from the man? Or some honesty from the man? That would do him some good. That's enough, Tibs, Trina said. Why? He asked, facing her. Maybe it was time they all stopped lying to themselves. Because the idea you don't need your family scares you? Don't you get that clinging to them holds you back? They aren't going to understand you and what you... Tibs has said, come on, don't. You hate what you have to do to be considered a noble, Tibs snapped, barely keeping the derision of his voice. Why are you even bothering when it's keeping you from the girl you love? Tandy is, that's enough, Tibs. Jekyll called. Yeah, ordered. Oh, and you, the fighter grabbed Tibs by the shoulder and shook him. You can tell everyone what you've worked out about me, Tibs. First, there's two things. One, do not ever speak to your team this way. Is that clear? I don't know what happened today to have you be... That's having you be this hurtful, but we lost 3 teams to the dungeon this week, Tibs snapped. Okay, Jekyll said uncertainly. I don't see why that's any... I don't know their names. I've gotten so busy with useless stuff, I can't know who's coming to the town anymore to have Stowe eat them. I'm supposed to keep them safe. That's my job. If I'm not going to do that, I should at least know who I failed. Okay, we'll address that later. Jekyll said, right now, I want you to remember that everyone keeps secret, including you, and the reason are their own. He wasn't planning on keeping things like that. Once they were done, he was walking himself to the guild and telling them everything. At least they'd be able to help him get a handle on this. The cost be damned. Of course, before they were done, he had to deal with Jackal. What's the second thing? He demanded impatiently. Jackal let go of him and dusted his shoulder, grinning. That one's simple. You're going to lie to me. What? Tibbs asked in disbelief. One lie? I'm not even going to ask for a big one. Tell me you're okay with Kumdar keeping things to himself, or that there's nothing wrong with Maz picking his honor over his heart. There is nothing wrong with that, the archer replied angrily. Tell me my family will understand, Rena said weakly, then swallowed. What was wrong with them? He looked at his friends, angry and in pain. The truth fixed things. Lies were what caused pain, not truth. Truth was freedom. Lies shackled people down. How did they not understand that? This was a kindness. It was a kindness to tell them how things truly were. He didn't do this to hurt them. The pain brought him to his knees. The pain of lying. But he hadn't lied. They had to know the truth, so he would. He screamed. Fine. He was angry. He wanted to lash out at someone, anyone at this point. He didn't have the right. Didn't he have the right for some revenge after everything he'd endured? He was on his hands and knees, panting. Is this what Harry dealt with? No, it wouldn't be. Harry wasn't affected by light the way Tibs was. No one was affected by an element like that. No one was affected by their element like he was. Harry's need for honesty was something the men had decided on. Tibs? That was who he was. Tibs, a man, a boy, not light. He didn't exist in a place where things were clear-cut. In his world, lies were needed. Readied himself for the pain that didn't come. Tibs? Jekyll asked again. The world functioned because people lied to each other and themselves. Karina told herself the family would understand because they were important to her. Yes, the truth was that clinging to them would probably hold her back, but she was a runner. She would be an adventurer. She had years ahead of her to come to terms with it, to let them go or let go of her dreams. Kumdar probably didn't have a choice in the secrets he kept. Yes, it wasn't darkness demanding he kept them, but the craving was them. But the craving for them was still there. And Maz, you're an asshole, he told Jackal. I know. Now lie to me, because we clearly didn't make the progress we thought we had last time. He rolled his eyes. You're an idiot. I said lie, Tibs, the fighter said impatiently. Everyone knows that one's true. Tibs wished he could show his friend how bright that lie was. How he didn't have to play the idiot, the jester. The urge to spew the truth was there, and it was strong, but he fought it. Jekyll was right in that he didn't have the control over his element he thought he'd had. Jekyll needed the safety being the idiot granted him. If no one took him seriously, he believed, he could never become the dangerous father was. He patted his cheek and let him keep that lie. His body protested as he stood, and looking at Karina kept him from going to her. She was hurt and fearful of him. I'm sorry for what I said. I was wrong. They understand why you're doing this. So, Jekyll said, we're all good? Tibs looked at the others. No, we're not. We're still friends, Tibs. Maz said, turning to leave. But don't come close to me for a while. One by one, his friend left him. Even Jackal's facade of buffoonery cracked, and with a shake of the head, he laughed. Alone, Tibs looked at the warehouse on the wall and wished that that's where the damage had been this time. And this concludes chapter 91 of Stepping Up. If you are enjoying this, wow, leave a like. If you want to know when the next one's going to be, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, you can do so for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me and read ahead, I think we're about 9 chapters ahead at this time, you can do that on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to me do these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.